The rain was cold, the mud was lethal, and the actor had just refused to crawl through it. On the set of The Shawshank Redemption, reality broke through the cinematic magic. The sewage pipe wasn't a prop, the water was chemically toxic, and Tim Robbins wasn't moving. It was a moment that nearly ended the film before its iconic escape was ever captured. Before we uncover what really happened, tell us in the comments, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about this story? When you think of The Shawshank Redemption today, you picture Tim Robbins as Andy Dufresne, the quiet, unshakable banker who carves his way to freedom with nothing but a rock hammer and 20 years of patience. It feels inevitable. Iconic. Casting so perfect it seems written in the stars. But the reality behind that casting decision is far more chaotic, and it nearly derailed the entire production before a single frame was shot. The script had been passed around Hollywood like a hot potato. Studios didn't want it. Executives didn't understand it. And the actors they wanted? They were the A-list names of 1992, the faces that could guarantee box office returns. Tom Cruise was offered the role of Andy. He passed. Johnny Depp was in the mix. He didn't bite. Kevin Costner was approached, imagine that alternate timeline, and he walked away too. The studio was desperate for a leading man with star power, someone who could convince audiences to sit through a 2.5-hour prison drama with no car chases and no explosions. Then director Frank Darabont had a different idea. He didn't want a movie star. He wanted the right man. He wanted someone who could convey dignity in shackles, intelligence behind bars, and hope in a place designed to destroy it. He wanted Tim Robbins. At the time, Robbins wasn't exactly unknown, he'd starred in Bull Durham and The Player, but he wasn't the guaranteed blockbuster name the studio was demanding. Robbins was tall, lanky, and possessed a quiet intensity that didn't scream leading man by Hollywood standards. He looked more like a poet than a prisoner. And that, Darabont believed, was exactly the point. But the studio fought back. Hard. They argued that Andy Dufresne needed to be more conventionally handsome, more charismatic, more bankable. The casting process turned into a tug-of-war between the director's vision and the studio's fear. Robbins had to fight for the role just as fiercely as the character would fight for his freedom. He read the script multiple times. He wrote letters. He showed up to meetings and gave readings that left producers silent. What they saw wasn't a star. They saw a man who could sit in silence for a scene and make you feel everything. That's when the tide began to turn. But even after Robbins was finally cast, the doubt didn't disappear. On the first day of filming, there were whispers on set. Was he too quiet? Too intellectual? Could this guy really carry a film that depended entirely on his internal performance? Then the cameras started rolling. And within the first few takes, the doubts vanished. Robbins wasn't playing Andy Dufresne. He was Andy Dufresne. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary. But while the lead actor was finding his place in Shawshank, another piece of the casting puzzle was proving even more difficult to solve. And it involved a character who wasn't even supposed to survive the first act, a character who would go on to become one of the most iconic figures in cinema history. The script arrived at his doorstep in the middle of the night. A friend had slipped it under the door, knowing it was the kind of project that could change everything. Morgan Freeman read it in one sitting, and when he looked up, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement. The part of Ellis Red Redding was written for a white Irishman. That was the detail he couldn't shake. The character was supposed to be an Irish-American convict with red hair and a foul mouth. Freeman was none of those things. But he called his agent anyway. What happened next was the start of a casting miracle that defied every industry standard. The studio had already compiled a list of white actors for the role, aging character actors who could bring the right Irish grit to the part. Names like Robert De Niro and Harrison Ford were floated. Gene Hackman was a real possibility. Each one could have brought something unique to the table, but none of them felt quite right to Darabont. Then Freeman walked into the room. He didn't have a formal audition scheduled. He didn't have a monologue prepared. He simply sat down across from Darabont and said, "I know the script tells you Red is Irish. But I also know that if you really think about it, you'll see that Red can be anyone. His job isn't to be a stereotype. His job is to be the conscience of this story." The director leaned forward. There was something about the way Freeman spoke, the gravity, the warmth, the authority, that felt exactly like the narrator the film needed. Darabont didn't care about the Irish background anymore. He cared about the voice. But the studio did care. They pushed back harder than they had with Robbins. This was 1993, and despite Freeman's Oscar nomination for Driving Miss Daisy, executives worried about how audiences would react to a black actor playing a character originally written as white. It was, by their calculations, a needless risk. They offered Freeman a different role in the film, a smaller part, something less central, to keep him involved without rocking the boat. Freeman refused. It was Red or nothing. The next few weeks became a tense waiting game. Darabont fought behind closed doors, arguing that the film's soul depended on the actor playing Red, not the color of his skin. He pointed out that the character's name was no longer about his ethnicity, it was about the redeeming quality of his friendship with Andy. That subtle shift, that reimagining of the character's essence, finally won the studio over. Morgan Freeman was cast. And the first time he read his opening narration, everyone on set fell silent. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. But there was one role that remained empty. A role so small on paper that it barely had dialogue, yet so vital to the film's emotional core that it had to be perfect. The actor who stepped into it would only appear on screen for a few minutes, but his performance would linger in the audience's mind long after the credits rolled. And the way he got the part is a story that still makes Hollywood insiders shake their heads in disbelief. It's one of the most quoted lines in cinema history. Andy Dufresne, fresh off his first conversation with the man who would become his closest friend, asks the question that's been on every viewer's mind, "Why do they call you Red?" And Morgan Freeman, with that signature smirk, delivers the punchline, "Maybe it's because I'm Irish." The audience laughs. It's a moment of levity in a film filled with despair. But here's what most fans never realize, that line wasn't just a joke. It was a deliberate wink. A secret handshake between the filmmakers and anyone who had read Stephen King's original novella. Because in King's 1982 story Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, Red was Irish. He was a middle-aged, red-haired Irishman with pale skin and a fiery temper. The nickname wasn't a mystery. It was a physical description. Morgan Freeman discovered this detail the first time he opened the book. He read the opening page, saw the character described as Irish, and snapped it shut. His immediate thought was, "I can't play an Irishman." For a moment, he considered walking away from what he already knew was an absolutely delightful script. He had even called his agent and said, "It doesn't matter which part it is, I want to be in it." But when he learned they wanted him for Red, the Irishman, he was flabbergasted. What Freeman didn't know was that director Frank Darabont had already made a decision. He didn't care about the character's race. He cared about the voice. He cared about the authority, the warmth, the quiet gravity that Freeman brought to every role. Darabont had envisioned Freeman for the part from the beginning, long before the studio began pushing for names like Clint Eastwood, Paul Newman, Harrison Ford, or Gene Hackman. Those actors were the safe choices. Freeman was the right choice. The joke was added as a tribute. A nod to the source material. A way for Darabont to honor King's original vision while still creating something entirely new. And it worked on every level. For casual audiences, it was a light-hearted moment. For fans of the novella, it was a brilliant piece of meta-commentary. And for Freeman? It was the moment he realized he'd just become part of cinematic history. But there was another casting decision unfolding behind the scenes, one that involved a young actor who walked away from the role of Tommy Williams, a decision that would haunt him for years to come. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. The iconic scene seems so effortless. Brooks Hatlin, the elderly prison librarian played by James Whitmore, gently opens his jacket to reveal a tiny baby crow nestled in his pocket. He takes a maggot from Andy's food and feeds it to the bird. It's a moment of unexpected tenderness in a film defined by cruelty. But behind that simple 2-second shot, a bureaucratic nightmare was unfolding that nearly brought production to a standstill. The American Humane Society was on set that day. Their job was to ensure no animals were mistreated during filming. A noble cause, to be sure. But when the crew attempted to feed a live maggot to the baby crow, the representative objected. It would be inhumane, they argued, to kill a maggot for the scene. Production ground to a halt. What happened next became one of the most absurd behind-the-scenes stories in Hollywood history. The crew was forced to scour the ground for a maggot that had died of natural causes. They couldn't just kill one themselves, that would violate the rules. They had to find one that had expired on its own terms. Director Frank Darabont later recalled the situation in his published annotated script, describing how he offered to have the dead maggot autopsied to prove it had died naturally. The Humane Society representative did not find the joke amusing. Eventually, the prop department created a maggot made of baby food. A waxworm was also used. The scene was finally shot, and audiences never knew the chaos behind it. The baby crow wasn't harmed. The maggot wasn't killed. And Hollywood learned that even a maggot has rights on a movie set. But while the crew was worrying about insect welfare, another detail was quietly being woven into the film's fabric, one that would become one of cinema's most celebrated hidden symbols. When Warden Norton flips through Andy's Bible near the film's climax, the rock hammer is hidden inside a specific book, Exodus. The Book of Exodus chronicles the Israelites' escape from Egypt. It's the story of liberation, of leaving bondage behind. Andy Dufresne wasn't just reading the Bible. He was living it. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video and subscribe for more true celebrity stories every week. The choice of Exodus was no accident. It was a deliberate, artistic statement. A reminder that Andy's escape was never just about breaking out of prison. It was about escaping the prison of his own life, the prison of injustice, the prison of despair. And it all began with a hammer hidden in the most ironic place imaginable. The scene that would become the most triumphant image in cinema history, Andy Dufresne emerging from the sewage pipe, arms outstretched to the heavens as rain washes away 20 years of captivity, was filmed in conditions that would make a health inspector faint. The creek wasn't filled with stage water or purified prop liquid. It was a real Ohio waterway, and it was absolutely rank with agricultural runoff. Director Frank Darabont later described it bluntly: "We were out in this horrible little creek that was filled with cow poop." Tim Robbins didn't just act the escape. He lived it. The production crew had to dam the creek to raise the water level, then pour sterilizing chemicals into the muck to prevent the actor from contracting a waterborne illness. The irony is staggering. The moment that represents Andy's spiritual rebirth, his baptism into freedom, was shot in a toxic slurry of real animal waste. Robbins emerged from that pipe covered in more than just stage makeup and brown-dyed water. He was coated in cow urine and God knows what else. But that wasn't the only danger. Before Robbins even reached that creek, he had to crawl through a pipe that was supposed to simulate a half-mile of raw sewage. The script, based on Stephen King's novella, calls it a river of excrement. The pipe itself wasn't filled with real waste, that would have been impossible, not to mention lethal. The crew used fuller's earth, a type of clean dirt used in filmmaking, to create the sludge. Yet even that wasn't the real threat. Robbins later revealed the true danger wasn't the fake sewage. It was the methane. In real life, if a man crawled through a working sewer pipe for that distance, the methane gas alone would kill him. The actor pointed out that the escape, as depicted, is pure movie magic. But that knowledge didn't make filming any easier. The enclosed space, the suffocating heat of the Ohio summer, the claustrophobia of a pipe barely 2 feet in diameter, all of it took a toll on the actor who had voluntarily put himself in solitary confinement to prepare for the role. If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. And yet, none of that physical discomfort mattered when the cameras rolled. What emerged from that pipe wasn't just Tim Robbins covered in prop sludge and creek water. It was the embodiment of hope. The rain wasn't just rain, it was the cleansing of a man's soul. Theatrical? Perhaps. But the raw emotion in Robbins' performance, captured in that single, unforgettable moment, came from a place of genuine exhaustion and relief. He had just crawled through hell, and the freedom on the other side felt earned. But while Robbins was wading through cow poop and dodging methane poisoning, another member of the cast was about to discover that the prison they were filming in had its own secrets that had nothing to do with Hollywood magic. The final scene of The Shawshank Redemption is etched into the collective memory of cinema. A dusty bus rolls down a Mexican highway. A weathered red walks across a pristine beach toward a man working on a boat. They embrace. The camera pulls back, and the credits roll over an image of hope fulfilled. It feels inevitable, perfect, as though it was always written that way. But behind that peaceful ending was a creative war that nearly changed everything. Director Frank Darabont had originally planned a far more ambiguous finale. He wanted the film to end on Red sitting in a bus, beginning his journey to find Andy, with no guarantee of what awaited him. The studio, Castle Rock Entertainment, pushed back hard. They argued that audiences who had invested 2.5 hours in these characters deserved a definitive, emotional payoff. Darabont resisted, believing ambiguity would be more artistically satisfying. The compromise? A reunion scene, but shot at a distance, keeping the moment slightly elusive rather than overly sentimental. What we got was a masterclass in balancing studio demands with artistic integrity. Morgan Freeman, however, almost refused to film the scene as written. Darabont wanted Red to blow the harmonica Andy had given him, a symbolic gesture to signal his arrival. Freeman flatly rejected the idea, calling it sort of asinine, sort of cliched, sort of unnecessary and overkill. He argued that the moment didn't need a prop, a sound effect, or a symbolic gesture. It needed stillness. It needed silence. It needed two friends simply finding each other. Darabont relented, and the scene became one of the most quietly powerful endings in film history, proof that sometimes the best direction a director can take is to listen to the actor who knows the character best. But the legacy of The Shawshank Redemption extends far beyond its final frame. It is a story of failure transformed into triumph, of a film that bombed at the box office only to become one of the most beloved movies ever made. Its journey from 51st place in the year-end box office rankings to the #1 spot on IMDb's top 250 is nothing short of miraculous. It's a testament to what happens when a film finds its audience, not in theaters, but in living rooms, through word of mouth, cable television, and home video. The film that no one wanted to see became the film no one could stop watching. And the physical location where it was filmed, the Ohio State Reformatory, has become a pilgrimage site, drawing tourists from around the world who want to walk the same halls as Andy and Red. It's a place steeped in history and, according to those who worked there, haunted by spirits. Actor Mark Ralston, who played the brutal inmate Boggs, once spent 4 hours locked in a cell in the prison's dungeon to prepare for his solitary confinement scene. He lasted just that long before he tapped out, convinced the place had spirits. Security guards, he said, quit regularly after hearing voices and shouts from empty cell blocks. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video and subscribe for more true celebrity stories every week. The Shawshank Redemption was never just a prison movie. It was a story about the indomitable nature of hope, the power of friendship, and the belief that freedom is not just a place but a state of mind. It's a film that continues to find new audiences, generation after generation, because its message is timeless. Stephen King sold the rights for $1,000 and never cashed the check, a framed gesture of love sent back to Darabont years later. Frank Darabont took a pay cut to direct it. Tim Robbins crawled through toxic water and Morgan Freeman threw a baseball for 9 hours straight, ending the day with his arm in a sling. They built a monument to hope out of mud, magic, and something that looked a lot like faith. And somewhere, out in the Pacific, on that imaginary beach, Andy Dufresne is still waiting for Red to show up. The only question is, are you still waiting too?